And those who come in will have to watch the beginning at another time. All right, so we are gonna go over mural and wheat paste installs and give you guys a couple tips and tricks for you to either utilize in a project going forward with Chelsea or out into the future. So these are just our project and guiding values, project goals and guiding values that we've been working with all throughout the summer for these projects, which all revolves around the idea that arts and culture is what makes places and communities healthy, connected, and vibrant. And so this is what we're gonna do today. We'll just quickly recap what we talked about in one of our last sessions, which was a design process of, you know, when you're thinking about a mural project or even an art project in general, what are some, you know, processes that you can go through to get started. And these are some things that help me and some other artists I know, and that's the 5 W's, which is the who, what, where, when, why, and how of a piece. And these 6 steps on the side are something that I feel that is really helpful process for me, which is research, you know, get yourself inspired. I find looking at other people's work really helpful, other artists' work, and just continue to sketch and get feedback. So we're gonna start off this session with, oh, and these were just a couple of things, sorry, to consider when designing. And this we went over in the last proposal, and that's in the last presentation, and that's all up on YouTube. So we'll talk first about wheat paste, and then we'll get into a little bit more about painted murals.
So for the wheat paste project, you are just going to, or you know, the artist cohort who's doing this project is just going to be sending us files, and then we're going to do the rest, but we'll explain to you kind of how that works just for your own efficacy. If you wanted to, if this is your first wheat paste experience and you're like, ooh, I like this, I want to do more of this. We're going to just be printing on paper and putting them up like it's wallpaper. So the files are really important because if the resolution is low, then they're going to look fuzzy. And the fancy word for fuzzy is rasterized or pixelated. Which some of you guys probably know that, but if not, important. So we're going to be working with vector files, which is basically a way to describe an image that's made up of information that that is what is the
not pixelated. There's no pixels.
But there's like math equations for each line. Like it's kind of fancy. But a pixelated image is just made up of a bunch of dots. So when you blow up a pixelated image, you see the dots, but when it's small, you don't see the dots. But vector images are special geometric information that you can blow up as big as you want and as small as you want. You don't really need to worry about that too much because we're going to be vectorizing your files. But we need to make sure that the resolution is high enough so that it can, you know, be vectorized and blown up and still look good. So the resolution should have a DPI. DPI stands for dots per inch, between 150 and 200. And that's actually kind of low, but we can work with that. If you can do it higher, that's better. And so you get to that by doing like image size, and then you can see the different options in there of your resolution. And the files should be 2 to 4 megabytes when they're compressed. So that we uncompress them, they'll be 40 to 60 megabytes. And if this is like new or you're really uncomfortable with it, just reach out to me and Amanda, and we can walk you through making sure that your files are saved correctly for this. You know, we'll be working with folks closely. So we're not just being like, this is how you do it, good luck guys, but this is just kind of like reference So we'll be working with vector files. So if you can just do that already, if you have those skills, that would be preferable to give those to us to work with. And one thing we learned this past week, which was very important, was that the color ink on the printers fades pretty fast. So we're going to be working in grayscale. And so that's helpful so that your images will be smaller. Once if they're color and you turn them into grayscale, then the file size gets a lot smaller. But they still can be painted afterwards. So that's something that is an option. So in the images here, that's behind the Salvation Army, or it used to be the Salvation Army. Now it's 456 Broadway. Behind 456 Broadway, if you're curious, you can take a look at these hummingbirds that we had put up as a test. And some of them we had gone back and painted. And so you can kind of see that look. And you can see the faded color one. So yeah, so painting after the fact is an option. And we're gonna be printing, it's basically like regular computer paper. And that's good because it's thin and the wheat paste will be absorbed by it. And we're gonna be printing on 36-inch wide rolls that can be as long as needed. And so if it's a really big image, we'll split it up into segments and then put each one up overlapping and piece them together like that. But we're gonna do all the printing and the installation. So this is just kind of for your info. It's kind of a lot. Does anybody have questions? We don't have many slides on wheat paste. But yeah, actually, yeah, I'll talk about the next slide. So Amanda put some little wheat paste recipes on here. If you Google like how to make wheat paste, you'll find stuff like this. And it's cool. It's all natural. It's flour and water. It's like you're making dumplings, but it's really wheat paste. And you can add sugar to it. Some people think that makes it like have a better, harder finish. We don't want to attract ants or anything. So I don't think that's like something we're gonna do in this, but yeah, you can add sugar. I've had wheat paste in the fridge for like 2 weeks and it's still good. So yeah, I wouldn't leave it out though. It gets like moldy and nasty. And yeah, the way that you paste it is you just use a roller. I kind of like to use my hand. You got to make sure you really get the edges. If you don't get the edges, then they'll start peeling and come off. And for wall surfaces, you know, we tested out on stucco and brick and metal and found that the metal peeled and the bricks, some of the bricks were fine, but some of them like was hard to get the edges to adhere because of the bumpy surface. But stucco seems to be the best surface. I think plywood is really good too, but we don't have any plywood walls, but just for like, you know, just to know that that's a really good surface if you're ever going to try to do this. But yeah, there's a lot, you know, there's a lot of it's not like a science as much as maybe some other art forms. There's a lot of different consistencies that work. And we added some acrylic medium to ours to kind of help with the consistency. Just kind of like thicken it up a little bit and make the finish a little bit glossier. And that was our favorite mix. So does anybody, I think that's the last wheat paste slide, right? So I want to just make sure, see if anybody has any questions on wheat paste before we jump into the mural tips and tricks and kind of how that might play out for different types of art.
Okay. And if anybody has questions during, feel free to flag us down. So I'm gonna go over 3 different techniques of how to get your, you know, drawn sketch up onto a wall. And so I'm gonna go through projection, a grid technique, and then something, I don't know what to call it. I've heard it called hieroglyph technique. So we'll go over that. So basically with a projector, you know, it's pretty simple in the sense of you will have your file on your computer, and you just plug your projector in, and then you go up and trace your drawing. You can trace it freehand. You can also use, you know, if you have straight edges, you can use levels and things like that. Things to keep in mind when you're projecting is that they obviously need a power source. So you'll need electricity, and that can be difficult sometimes to find when you're working in, you know, outside. So as you look at your sites, just keep that in mind if you want to use a projector. I will say sometimes electrical lifts and gas-powered lifts have an electrical outlet on them. Some people forget that, but that can also be helpful if you have an extra lift hanging around your site. And for some of the larger murals, you might. Bright lights like street lights and house lights can interfere with projecting. So, you know, you may want to bring a beach towel or something with you. And then, of course, when you're working at night out in the city, there can be noise ordinances. For example, I was working in Somerville. I believe their noise ordinance is like 7 p.m. So those are other things you just might want to consider when you're out working in the middle of a city. And I included this kind of funny middle picture. This was me when I was, well, this is my friend Sophie drawing. I took the photo. But we were in the middle of Boston, and so we have this electrical cord going across one of the streets, and like this is like downtown crossing. And I had like somebody stop by, and I had started, you can see at the end of the image, closer to the caution cone, I had started like taping it down kind of nicely, and then someone was like, "Oh, let me help you," and just was like putting tape over curly wire. Anyways, not something I would suggest. Always weight down your cords. Next, we have a grid and measuring technique. So that's essentially, you know, you put a grid over your mock-up or your sketch, and then you'll also put a grid on the wall after it's primed, and then you'll transfer the image accordingly. In more complicated areas, you can do a smaller grid on top of it. And also numbering your grid can help you keep your place. If you're gridding, I would highly suggest using snap lines to create your verticals and your horizontals. It's just a quick and sort of easy way. And they stay relatively level, so you don't really have to worry about that. In smaller scenarios like this one on the right here, you know, you may just sort of measure, you know, certain areas and be good to go. I always say like measure twice, cut once. It's true and always helpful. I would say also with grids, you know, you can also, like I said, put smaller grids on top. So if you want more detail in a specific area or you're having trouble, that works well. And so the hieroglyph technique, which I'm going to talk about a little bit next, is kind of confusing. And I drew, and I can send this out later, because I drew a little cartoon to like try and help with the process. But basically, the way you start is you put a primer down. So your primer is down on your wall. And then you go up on your wall and you just make marks all over it. It doesn't really matter what the marks are. In the example I have here, we actually tried to sort of like use the sketch. So we drew images similar to the actual mock-up. And so what you can see here on the left is these green lines. Can you guys see them? Sort of, yeah. And I tried to pull it out in black and white and bump up the contrast to help you see it a little bit. But what those green lines are is our like hieroglyph sketches. And so you go up, you put all those hieroglyphs on, you take a picture, and then you overlay it onto your mock-up. It's almost like a backwards grid, sort of. And so what you can see here is this is a mock-up. And then all of these little pink marks are the hieroglyphs. And that's where those green bits come in. And so you can see here, I can actually tell you where this lift is on the wall through these green hieroglyphs. So these green hieroglyphs, let's see, there's a, right up here. I think, can you guys see my mouse? Yeah. So, and then you start to fill in. So you use the hieroglyphs as a marker type thing. I can send this out. It's really silly, but basically, so you start, like I said, with a blank wall. You put the hieroglyphs up, you take a picture, and then you overlay the images, and that's what you're left with on the bottom. A little confusing, but it works well. This is something I like to remind people that can be done with one person, whereas with a grid, you can't really do that quickly with one person. You know, it's difficult to do snap lines with one person. So, you know, I think the hieroglyph technique is something, you know, you can more easily do alone. So these are a few other tips and tricks that I wanted to go through and things you might want to consider when you're on the wall. So one of the biggest sort of issues that people have is transferring the small image to a large canvas, losing your place. It can be very disorienting because, you know, you're up close and you're used to looking at something so small. So transferring those two can get difficult. So don't get discouraged. That happens to everybody. I would say getting lost in the details that can, you know, and staying in one spot for hours and hours until you get it just right can be another sort of pit you might fall into. So my suggestion, and you'll see this as sort of a theme throughout all of these, is make sure that you're stepping back. Make sure you're going across the street to look at your wall from far away. And one thing I also tend to see both in, you know, drawing and painting on a small scale, but also on a large scale is values tend to get exaggerated. So values are the lights and darks of your piece. And so the lightest light, just make sure you're checking it, and your darkest dark, it might not be that black paint. It might actually be a couple of values higher. And so I would say just make sure that you're, again, looking at your reference in your mock-up. Another thing that we tend to do is overemphasize curves as well as the straightness of lines. So again, go back to your reference drawings. And I think, you know, one thing that people tend to forget as they're up close is, you know, if you create a very slight arc, eventually it's going to become a circle. And so, you know, your smallest sort of, your smallest details will translate differently as you step back. So always remember to step back. And finally, take care of your equipment. You can reuse your hand rollers and your brushes for other projects. It's a way to save money. And so I always say, remember to take care of your equipment. And buying, you know, the dirty, cheap stuff isn't necessarily the best thing to do. You know, if you buy sort of nice quality stuff, it will last if you take care of it. And then I just want to check in with you guys. Do you have any questions so far about projecting or the hieroglyph technique or grid?
I want to just add a quick like tip and trick thing. It's kind of weird that
Please.
Has been like so helpful. It's like this little weird thing that's just been so weirdly helpful. And that squinting part of stepping back, like when you squint at your work, then you can't, because sometimes like you get so bogged down by the details. When you squint, you can't see all that stuff, but you can see the shapes in more, you know, just kind of, you just see the shapes more than the rest of it. So That's been so helpful for me to step back, squint, and see the composition in that way.
One question I have, do muralists typically sort of try to do the whole thing as a first pass and then go in and fill in the details, or do they kind of focus on one part of the grid at a time?
That's a great question. Honestly, it depends on your situation. I tend to have, suggest, and I try to work top down. So if you drip on something that's below you, you won't have to go back and touch it up. It'll just be your first pass. The way that I paint and try to paint, and sometimes when you get up on the wall, you might be nervous, or, something happened, you were cut off and you forget, things as they happen. And so what I try and do is block out the mural with sort of large blocks of color, and then go back in to add shading and detail. So it's almost like a two-step process. And that can be really helpful because you might have somebody that's, unskilled working with you. So if you have an assistant, you can, the large sort of big effort is blocking out those pieces of color. And then, as sort of the lead, you can go back in and work on the details. That's what I'd suggest. Again, sometimes your wall doesn't dictate like a top down, and you have to go bottom up because, the scaffolding's missing or not there yet. So it's sort of just like you flex with the situation. Or I would say every wall is different. and some artists, say, your design might be like, let's get the background in first. And then, let's work with detail on other pieces. So for example, that vase mural, that was a mural that I helped put up in Boston down in Chinatown. And so with that, we almost like did a zigzag across the wall, but we sort of left that main vase and the bottom portion for last. And I will say another sort of tip, if you're working on a large wall, and for example, like this vase one, you may want to leave a more or less detailed bottom, just in case it gets tagged. So that's what Brian did. It's something I hadn't even really thought of for larger pieces, but that's one reason why he left sort of a large strip of green there at the bottom, so it could be easily covered if needed. He also lives in Canada, so that might be his thinking behind it as well. He couldn't come back to repair it but I don't believe it's been tagged, so that's great. So the last method I want to talk about is using parachute cloth. So parachute cloth is like a thin type of canvas. And so what you would do is you would prime these sheets and then draw out your design. You could use a projection, you could use a grid. So that's what you see here below, is all of these sheets are on the wall. They've been primed and they're hanging to dry. And then these sheets here have the actual design on them. And to install them, you use an acrylic medium, and essentially you roll it on the back of these pieces and then squeegee it onto the wall. And you can see that this technique, I was doing this down in Philadelphia, and this technique, you can actually use it on walls that are not straight. I don't know if you can see this in the photo, but there's a lot of texture to this wall. And I would say on some of those indents, it was a good 6 to 8 inch indent, it would go like that type deal. So you can easily cut the pieces of fabric and, sort of piece them together. And this mural, this was photographs, and they were printed on to the canvas. So we were able to print repeats. And so we could, cut a piece and paste it on top as we went over those weird bumps and stuff. And the important thing is to make sure with this method, take a wet sponge when you finish actually putting the piece on and squeegeeing all that acrylic medium out, just so you don't have too much of a haze left on the top. And this method, when I was doing it in Philadelphia, I always heard like, oh, walls would, you know, that had these murals would stay up when the rest of the building fell down. So supposedly it works really well. And then I wanted to introduce you guys to some equipment that as muralists you may want to get used to using. Down here on the left, we have a spray washer. And you know, you can use those to get off old paint as well as like dirt and moss and stuff like that. It's always a good idea to give your wall a bit of a cleaning. If you don't have access to a spray washer or anything like that, I would take just like a brush and just do a rough scrub on it if you can, just to get all the dirt off there. You want a semi-clean slate to have the painted here. Scaffolding and ladders, those are great things to work on. If you're doing a larger piece, you may see scissor lifts and boom lifts. And with those, I always suggest getting yourself licensed to drive them. They're all very different. And so the nuances of each machine is a little bit different. And it's heavy machinery, so it can be dangerous. And I would say just, you know, as we mentioned before, if you're working with, you know, heavy equipment or even with ladders and scaffolding, just be aware of what's on your site, whether it's electrical wires or drainage or anything like that. Just be aware of what's going on around you so you don't get hurt.
Sorry, Amanda, you said you have to get a license to drive those scissor lifts?
If you can get a license, you can probably operate them without them, but it's an OSHA license. So it's, I forget what OSHA stands for, something.
Occupational safety.
Yeah. Occupational safety. No, occupational health and safety. And I believe United Rental, you can do the classes through them. I think there's a couple of ones that you can do them online. I think the online ones are pretty cheap, like around $75. I believe that with a scissor lifts, and don't quote me on this, but I believe it's technically scaffolding or under like OSHA, there's some sort of designation that kicks it over to that rather than it being some like a heavy equipment. So I forget exactly what it is. And I should say with a boom lift, you always have to wear a harness. On a scissor lift, you do not have to wear a harness. With a boom lift, you have to wear a harness, and you need to double check how long your lanyard is. So if you're working, for example, 12 feet off the ground and you have a 15-foot lanyard, that's not going to work. That's not going to do anything for you.
Can you talk a little bit more about like other safety things, like if there are electrical wires or if you're on a hollow sidewalk or things like that? Are there processes you have to do to get permission or whatever?
Yeah, so in terms of electrical wires, I believe the OSHA standard, again, I'm not an OSHA rep, so I don't know. I believe it's working within 10 feet of a power line. You don't want to do that. If you are going to be working within 10 feet of a power line, you should talk to an electrical company and get the wires insulated. And they will then tell you it doesn't actually insulate the wires, so you still have to be careful working within 10 feet of the wires. They always say, even though they're insulated, it is, it's more so that you can see it out of the corner of your eye because they're like bright yellow. And so then you're like, oh, I'm gonna see this thing. I'm not gonna go up any further. They can I have talked to power companies. Usually it costs quite a hefty fee, but they can sometimes actually move the lines for you and like engineer a way to get them away from the site if needed. That is probably your most expensive option. But usually National Grid, and you'll see what I'm talking about on sometimes like houses that have lower lines or they're going over a porch. You'll see that type of insulation. And then other safety, main ones are electrical wires and, you know, drainage. I would just say with drainage, you just don't want to park your wheel or like a main footing of a lift on top of a sewer, you know, like a sewer grate or something like that. You know, in terms of hollow sidewalks, that's more of a question maybe for DPW or an engineer.
Do you usually have somebody accompany you, just like if it's like a busy sidewalk, somebody to like keep pedestrians away to alert them, or is it usually kind of self-explanatory with a couple cones?
Usually it's self-explanatory with a couple of cones. I have found that it doesn't matter how much signage you put up or caution tape, people tend to go under and around it if they can. So just be mindful of that. It is nice to sometimes have a buddy to help you, you know, keep things safe. Yes, there's a hand.
It's Nikki. I'm not going to be doing the wheat paste. I send in photos, and I think that's enough at this point. But it's very interesting having had a father who was an artist. I'm not. I wanted to second what Mimi said. Based on some past experiences, I think it's important to go with a buddy. It's a safety issue. It's also someone else can give a second perspective for you. But if you know, or at the very least, tell someone where you're going to be at what time and when you're leaving, so that if there is a problem, they know. That's my suggestion.
Thank you, Nikki.
I might also add a good use for the buddy, or a good way that buddy often helps is to chat with people, because sometimes people are just so curious and they just want to chat. And if you're trying to like get your work done, it's really hard to be super friendly and chatty all the time. So having a buddy to just like chat people up and keep it safe is another added bonus.
And if your buddy is skilled, what sometimes you can do is have them paint for you and you can talk to the public. So it works both ways. Anybody else have any questions about projectors or anything like that? I will have projectors available for people down the line if they decide they want to use them for this project. So if you get to the final round and need a projector, I have one that you can use.
And aren't we not going above 12 feet? Do we want to mention that?
Yes, we're not going above 12 feet. We're staying at that 1-story zone so that we can use rolling scaffold and ladders.
Yeah. So the lift is just kind of like interesting info.
Yes.
But not practical for this project per se, but such a fun thing. I love them.
They're fun to do. So if you ever have the chance, they can be a lot of fun.
Yeah.
And lastly, these are a couple different places to visit. And if you guys have a technique that you like for installing murals or wheat paste, let us know. I'm always eager to learn things. And the only way that I know about all these techniques is because I've helped a bunch of different people and learned a bunch of different methods. So I love to learn more. So if anybody has anything that they want to say either now or just email us, that's cool too.
I've got another question for you, Amanda. A little bit about time management, or like, my husband's always teasing me because I'm a horrible time estimator, and I always say things only take half an hour and it takes 6 hours. Is there like a rule of thumb about like how long it takes to make certain murals?
No, I wish there was. I think every artist is different. I would say that spray artists, they definitely are able to go a little bit faster. It's just sort of the way the medium works. I would just say try not to get bogged down by one portion and just try and spread yourself evenly, your time evenly over the wall. It's difficult. And I think that's where, you know, especially like if you have a buddy, they can be like, hey, dude, you're spending a lot of time in that one area. Maybe it's time to like take a breath, move on. I mean, it can be helpful to sort of break it up into pieces and be like, all right, I have 2 weeks. So I think that, you know, section is going to take me at least 2 days. And, you know, you can sort of block it out like that and reassess as you move through the mural. That can be helpful. But I would just say majorly, you know, get on the wall and try not to limit yourself and see how you start to flow and learn from that. I learned, you know, unfortunately, I learn something every time I get up on the wall. I shouldn't say unfortunately, it just can be frustrating because you'll, you know, finish a project and be like, darn, if I just knew that beforehand, it would have made it so much easier. So I would say, you know, you're gonna learn as you know, build your practice and keep an open mind as you learn. All right, if there are no questions, then I will have you guys all sign off.
Do you want to go over the process for folks that have submitted applications? Maybe that folks are waiting to hear back from us?
Yes, we are going to review everything this week, and then by the end of next week, we will be letting the semifinalists for the painted murals, let them know who the semifinalists are, and then we'll talk with all the wheatpaste folks as well. We're not going to do a semifinalist run for them, but we'll let them know what our decision is.
How many photos or pieces of art have you received? How many birds have you received?
Carolyn, we've received, how many different files? I think 30 or so different files.
Great. I just wanted to know how much competition I had.
Oh, I think we're going to end up using probably one bird from each person.
Right.
And then if we're looking to fill in more, then we'll add. I wanted to say we are going to do a second round, and I was going to pull up the poster for the birds. We're going to do a second round and do another deadline for that, which is going to be the 21st, I believe.
So 2 weeks. So we're hoping to get some of the birds up around, like closer to the deadline, so people can see it and be like, oh my God, I want to submit a bird. But the design, the general design is we're going to create a tree and put that on the wall behind Luther Place. And the birds are either going to be perched on the branches or flying around. Nikki, one of yours is like a goose with the sun behind it, or a couple of them have the sun. So those would be cool to have, like the sun with the birds. So you know, trying to work with what people are sharing and incorporating this into like one big composition of sort of like a landscape. And if we get more birds, then maybe we'll add more trees or some shrubbery or something like that. So we're hoping to get like you know, flocked with birds, lots of birds. So if anybody hasn't, you know, sent us any birds, it doesn't have to be original work. You could just like doodle a bird on a napkin while you're, you know, waiting at your fancy restaurant because everybody's dining out so much. But yeah, I just say like it could be loose. It could be, you know, something that you've already done. You could look through your sketchbook and be like, I love this bird, take a picture and send it to us. It doesn't have to be super deep, but it could be super deep. You know, we're looking for a range of expression and have, you know, all of this different energy sort of come together in this piece.
And you know, I like the idea that you have the trees and the birds because you have the roots and the wings.
Yeah.
All right, if anybody has questions going forward or is ever stuck in a mural install, you know who to get in touch with, Carolyn and I. I hope this has been a little bit educational. But again, if you guys have any questions, send us an email. But besides that, have a wonderful, today's Tuesday night.
Thank
All
you.
right, bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
Awesome. Thank you. Amanda and Carolyn, I'm going to email you guys the image